And then we broke up.
Hey guys, morning. I mean afternoon.
Hey Marty. Hi Vaughn.
I just woken up.
Hi, Marty. Are you still in Japan? I recognize the artwork behind your head.
Yeah, I'm still in Japan. Yeah.
How's the snow?
Snow's been awesome. Yeah, thank you. How's the heat in Australia, in Melbourne?
Yeah, we're hitting the hot weather. It's going to be a hot one today.
Has it been up to 40?
Yeah, there'll be 40 yesterday afternoon, today. Yeah.
Oh, God. How do you cope?
Air conditioning.
Yeah. Don't go out. Do you just go out sort of like before 9 and in the evening, or you just
Australians aren't that clever.
Really? You do go out in 40 degrees. It's just horrendous. I pity the farmers, but I assume those guys that they don't farm at that time, do they?
No.
Unless they're air conditioned machinery or whatever.
Yeah. No, I don't know that much about farming, but it'd be seasonal. We get winter rain, and so all the harvesting's done in spring. Not in the UK you get sort of summer rain and then harvest in autumn. We get winter rain and harvest in spring. So yeah, it's about as much as I know. So why all the way to Japan for the snow and not somewhere in Europe?
Well, I love Japan for beyond the snow. Culturally, I'm just really into Japan. I just love it. I like Tokyo is one of my favorite cities, so I kind of combine it with just for the last few years hanging out in Japan, you know, just enjoying the whole thing, really. The food, the culture, the environment, the snow. Love it.
My father grew up in Shanghai. The family
Right.
lived in Shanghai, and they used to take their holiday in Japan for the cherry blossom season. And my grandfather was, you know, a great fan of the Japanese, which stood him in good stead when he was a civilian prisoner of war in Singapore during the Japanese occupation.
Yeah. Did he? And he was still cool with them even after being a prisoner of war.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. That's quite unusual.
Well, I suspect that a lot of the brutal treatment was towards soldiers who had given up. You know, who had what's the word when soldiers give up? You know, there was a lot of disrespect from the Japanese to the soldiers, but my grandfather was a civilian and I think understood the Japanese culture. Yeah. But there's a funny story, so I don't want to bore anybody, but you know that British colonial Singapore back in the 30s, well, the Singapore Swimming Club had the second or the equal largest swimming pool in the world. The largest one was in the UK, built in, you know, Victorian times things, and Singapore had copied the pool. It was a huge pool and it was set right on the water's edge, and the seawater was just pumped into the pool, you know, seaweed and jellyfish and stuff was filtered out, and it was just seawater in this huge pool. The Japanese wanted to break the seawall and use the pool to park their mini submarines.
Nice.
The committee of the Singapore Swimming Club were all interned. So they held an extraordinary annual general meeting to discuss the Japanese proposal, decided not to give the Japanese permission, you know, the Japanese military permission to wreck the pool and break the seawall. They had a meeting with the Japanese commander and said, we're very sorry to inform you, but we don't give you permission. Yeah. And the seawall was never broken and the pool was intact.
That's hilarious. It's still there. It's still there today.
Well, it is and it isn't. It subsequently, you know, like in the last 10, 20 years. Oh, here's
Morning,
Chris.
Afternoon, Chris.
Hey, everybody.
We were talking about
A swimming pool.
swimming pool in Singapore in the 30s.
Yeah, I heard something about submarines and swimming pools and Japanese, and I don't know what the hell is going on.
True story. True story. The Japanese were going to use the pool of the Singapore Swimming Club to park their mini submarines. My grandfather was a prisoner of war and was a member of the committee of the club. So the committee held a meeting and told the Japanese that they didn't have permission to, and the pool was left intact. Whether that was because the Japanese were, you know, impressed by the...
It's a pretty cool story. It's a very positive story of that period in the war. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
The alternative bridge over the River Kwai.
Absolutely. I never thought of it that way. You're right.
No. All right. So it's our second week for this incubator, and in the second week of the incubator, I like to go over the fundamentals of the hero's journey in depth and show you how to really apply it, these different steps and different ideas to your work. I may have mentioned this before, but I'm sure many of you are familiar just with the basic idea of the hero's journey. You may even, be a little more familiar with it to some level, but I really see a difference in writers who really break down these steps with examples and really incorporate it into their work. Now, the hero's journey, right, is not something that you should, apply formulaically all the time, But it is something where if you have an analytical understanding of these fundamentals, you'll write in a way where, you know, the structure's there, the structure works, but you can break with convention at different times. Like, there's a difference between going with a structure and then knowing where it can be artfully broken, and just kind of sitting down and just haphazardly just throwing things on the page. And I see a lot of people doing that latter thing, saying, well, I don't want my creativity to be constrained to, you know, using some formula that, you know, institutes patriarchy. And so I was like, well, that's really not what it's about. There's you know, I really do, I see it work over and over and over again. And I see it work in these, you know, the scripts that generally make it to the top of the blacklist year after year. There will be exceptions to that, obviously, like sometimes concepts make it to the top without, you know, regard to whether they actually work structurally. But the scripts and stories that tend to resonate the most with people and have the best shot of getting made and making it through this Hollywood system are those that do have a strong understanding and use and make use of this very classical structure. And like I said, all of this is just another way to understand the basic idea of how you tell any story. And we'll get a handle on that part of it as well. So, you know, if you're not familiar with it, Joseph Campbell in, you know, back in like, you know, was I believe an American mythologist or whatever, wherever he was from, back in like the 1940s, he published this book called, you know, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And as a mythologist, he was someone who collected all these stories and myths and, you know, just, yeah, it was folklore from around the world, and really broke down, hey, I'm seeing all these patterns in these stories. In every culture, every time period, all these different religions, they're all using a very similar structure. There must be something to that. And, you know, his book had quite a massive effect, rippled out through culture, and has affected all of us in ways that, you know, maybe many people aren't that familiar with, but a lot of creators, especially in the 1970s, will cite Joseph Campbell as very influential on their work. Like, we owe everything that came out of Star Wars, we owe in some way that owes some debt to Joseph Campbell very deeply. Anything like, you know, things like Lion King, that was very much taken, you know, follows these steps. Like all these, quite a few popular films come from this structure. You will find that art films that are, you know, play around with structure and are more like tone poems and things, they're not going to follow that as much. But there are still some things that they take from it, like even something like, you know, Pulp Fiction. When you watch Pulp Fiction, like when Pulp Fiction came out, when you watch it now, it feels very much like, well, that's not following any sort of structure. That doesn't follow any classical archetypes. But Christopher Vogler, in his book Writer's Journey, has a whole giant section where he breaks down every bit of Pulp Fiction and shows you how it's repeating the same exact patterns that we see in all of these other stories. So without further ado, I want to share with you this diagram that comes from Christopher Vogler's book. Again, that book is The Writer's Journey. If you have it, you may have seen it before, but we're going to use it to really kind of break down all the steps. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. I'm always a little hesitant about making these things work, so just give me a second here. Share. Let me see here. Do we see this? Do we see this diagram here?
We got it.
All right. Do we see my my cursor here? My cursor moving around. Okay. So this is a visual representation of the hero's journey. All of these diagrams can look, if you're not familiar with them, the different diagrams I'll be showing you may look a little intimidating at first, but we're going to break it down in a way that's really quite easy to follow. I'm going to tell you what I think the secret to every story is. The secret to every story is a meaningful conflict that changes the character, okay? Some meaningful conflict that your protagonist has to go through that is, you know, addressing the conflict is the plot object of the story, and the growth that the character goes through as a result of learning to face and overcome that conflict is their character arc. Every single story that's worth telling engages with that very basic structure. What is the conflict we need to face? So when you think about it like that, it makes this diagram with its 12 steps much easier to follow, because what we want to look at first, and then we'll go step by step through all these, is we look at, like, think of this as a clock, right? This doesn't perfectly line up, like these numbers right here don't perfectly line up. But just in general, we've got 12 o'clock right here, or even like 1 o'clock, and we've got 6 o'clock right here. These are the two most important things to start with, right? You start with a character that's at the top of this clock beginning their journey. And they're in their ordinary world, they're safe, everything is exactly as they think they want it, and life is just ordinary and normal for them. Now, without looking to all these other things to the side yet, let's skip ahead to looking what's at 6 o'clock. What's at number 8 on this diagram, but just to visually remember it, what is at 6 o'clock here? 6 o'clock here is that conflict that I was talking about. What is the main problem that your character has to face in his or her world? What is this central ordeal that they have to deal with? It should be the thing that, like, is the biggest problem that could possibly face your character. You want a good, like, to have a really well-told story, a story that's going to really take things to the end of the line. This conflict that's at 6 o'clock should be the thing that is the most challenging for your character, right? So your character has to face this challenge. They probably don't want to face it, but that's what they're going to have to do for the story to end. So from that point, once we know who our character is at the beginning, and we know what it is that they as an individual need to face, the rest of this falls right into place. Because from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, this side of the diagram, all of this is about getting them prepared to face this problem, right? So this half of the clock is like, you've got a character who needs to face something. They're not ready to do it yet, but all of these different steps, these things that are happening here, get them ready to face this central ordeal. Once they face this central ordeal, the story is not over yet, because a well-told story is going to have a little bit more to it. The other half of this clock here is about what are the consequences. Once they face this, what are the consequences that come of this? Usually a character will, they'll face their big problem. They have the opportunity to grow, but it's going to take one last step for them to really incorporate the lessons that are right in front of them. And that's what this whole thing over here is about. It's far fewer like little numbers and steps that are here, but it's all about how do we incorporate what is the aftermath of this ordeal that we're dealing with, okay? So remember, from the top, what is normal, what is ordinary for this person, how does this person begin, what is the big thing that they have to face, what gets them ready for it, and then once they've faced it, are they able to incorporate these lessons, and what is the aftermath of this problem that they've dealt with? Every single story that is worth telling is going to follow this basic sort of structure in some way. We've all heard stories where, you're kind of like, well, what's the point of that story? Where is it going? If someone starts rambling on about what happened to them early on in the morning today, and it kind of goes nowhere, and it goes off on all these different tangents, you lose attention pretty quickly. But if the story that you're hearing from someone who's telling you about their day is about them coming across a big problem that they don't know how they're going to face, but somehow you see how they were able to face it, that turns into a very satisfying story. And it potentially teaches you something about life in general. Because why do we tell stories? Why have we told stories for as long as humans have been able to communicate with one another? We tell them to learn, to share our knowledge and to learn, to share something about this is how we think life is. Like when people back in, hunter-gatherer, caveman, or, people living out in the savannah or whatever days, you would tell people about what are the dangers that we faced on the hunt when we went out over the mountains to capture our food or whatever. And you tell these stories to children to get them prepared for what they're going to one day have to face. You tell them to people who maybe shouldn't be leaving the pack to warn them how to, not to stray too far. There are all these reasons that go back to very basic things about why we as humans need stories. But if your story does not have a central conflict that is going to allow meaningful change or growth for the protagonist, there's a fundamental flaw with the story that you're telling, okay? So let's break down a little bit of these steps, mostly in the preparation. Now, when I'm reading a script, and I think when most people are reading a script, they can tell pretty quickly. This is why you'll have people saying to you, I can tell in one page whether something is good. I can tell whether, 15 pages in, I know whether I want to read anymore. First 15 pages, there's a lot of this sort of setup going along. And usually the first 15 pages are going to take you right about to maybe somewhere in here. Usually like page 30 into something, like we're talking a 90 or to 120 page screenplay. Page 30, the end of Act 1, reaches this point here, which is called crossing the threshold. Just to give you an idea. Now, this doesn't perfectly map out in terms of page length because we're talking about a lot of steps here to take us through Act 1. And then much of this is going to be Act 2. And then a lot of this is going to end up being like your Act 3, right? But let's start from the very beginning. We've got a protagonist who, your story should be about somebody. If it's not about somebody going out to do something, it's not really a story. You're maybe telling us about a concept, if it's some big ensemble piece and characters are just doing things all over the place, maybe it's some sort of soap opera, but we're talking about specific storylines here because that's what a movie needs, is a spine. It needs a storyline that's going to pull us all the way through. Your character has to be somebody that we're introduced to at the very beginning as being kind of, the world around them is exactly what they expect it to be. Just like all of us, I think every single one of us are living, at least right now, in a bit of a off-white or beige kind of world. Like just look at the backgrounds in everyone's picture on here, right? We're all living in something that's rather ordinary. Now, if I was actually living, or somehow in this sort of, like it would be my ordinary world could be much different if that background was actually something real. It would be a little bit more fascinating. But to me, that would still be ordinary. That's why, if you look at something like Star Wars, right? I'm assuming, have we all seen Star Wars? Just so I've got something to kind of work with that we all have a familiarity with. Okay. Star Wars very easily maps to this. So that's why it's a really good example to use. But you can use this in many different other contexts. The ordinary world, like Star Wars begins a little bit with kind of a teaser, right? The teaser is not the Death Star, but the Star Destroyer coming in and doing the whole Princess Leia thing and, Darth Vader coming in and throwing things out of balance. But the story really starts when we meet the protagonist, Luke Skywalker. And even though Luke Skywalker lives on an alien world with 2 suns where there's robots that do things for them, all this weird stuff, we come to find out very quickly his world, as he sees it, is very ordinary. He lives in the desert. They farm moisture. Day in and day out, he's doing the exact same thing, and he's losing his mind because he wants to get out of there. But this is his ordinary world. This is what he's used to. His vision, too, of like what an abnormal world could be is idealized. It's something he hasn't actually experienced, so he has no way of knowing whether that's something he actually wants, right? So we do spend quite a bit of time getting to know how boring things are for him, right? But then things start to happen, right? He ends up, he finds that message from, he finds that message from Princess Leia inside of R2-D2, and R2-D2 goes on this trek that takes him out into the desert, and they have the conflict with the Sand People. There's a call to adventure that's going on here. Every one of your characters, or not every one of your characters, every protagonist that you have in any story at some point is going to be faced with this idea that their world is about to change. Really, their world is being thrown out of balance somehow, right? This ordinary, mundane, beige world that we live in, something about it has changed, right? That happens for Luke Skywalker. That really, on the most interesting days that we as human beings have in our lives, that's exactly what happens to us too. When something unusual happens to us, it's a bit of a call to adventure. It's an inciting incident. When that inciting incident, when something in your ordinary daily routine goes completely abnormally and it hints at a possibly bigger problem, then you are being called to adventure. You're being called to deal with that problem. So this call to adventure right here is kind of the herald that's saying, you're going to have to face this at some point. You're maybe not ready to do it, and you're probably not ready to do it, but at some point, you're going to have to face this. So at some point, Luke Skywalker is going to be called away from his ordinary, mundane world. Now, in Star Wars, the steps which can happen, like the meeting the mentor, doesn't immediately happen, like the meeting of the mentor happens a little bit before the refusal of the call. Because essentially what's happening here is this character is being called to deal with a problem, to take up their destiny, to do something that's going to make them change and grow and be something different. But every character, we're all conservative in the way we approach our lives. We are comfortable with our beige existence. We set up our beige existence. It is what it is because we've made it that way. And it's scary to go outside of those bounds. It's scary to do something different. It's something that an ordinary human being, a person that we can identify with and relate to ourselves, they're going to initially refuse to take up this adventure because it means even more potential problems for them. It means something scary is going to happen and we're not ready to deal with this. So that's this refusal of the call. And we need this here to build tension, because if a character just immediately is given the call to adventure and is like, out the door before the call to adventure is even completed, it just feels, you can't build that sort of satisfaction of feeling the character overcoming something to be ready to go outside of their ordinariness, and it just doesn't feel like the way a normal average human being would actually act, right? Because we're all scared to some degree. And that allows us to have a bit more empathy with these types of characters, because a character who is too ready to go out there and do everything is, they feel superhuman to us. They feel like something outside of ourselves, right? Even someone like Indiana Jones, like let's go and take a look at something like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When Indiana Jones gets the call to adventure, what happens, right? He meets that guy who talks to him about the Grail legend and the Grail lore and all of this stuff, and is trying to entice him to go on this this journey to capture the Grail before the Nazis get a hold of it. And even Indiana Jones initially denies that call to adventure. He says, "This is not for me. You want my dad. My dad is the one who is obsessed with this. I'm not the guy for you. This is too much for me." Right? Even Indiana Jones, who's like definitely like superhero type, has these moments of doubt, these moments of self-doubt. And that's where we can identify with them before they go off onto this journey. So what happens in Star Wars is the meeting with the mentor happens a little bit before the refusal of the call. And what the meeting of the mentor is remember, this whole side of the hero's journey is about getting you prepared. Meeting the mentor is really meeting someone or some source of information that gets you ready, motivated, or with the right amount of information to set out on this journey. That's exactly who Obi-Wan Kenobi is in Star Wars. He is the mentor. He tells Luke of his destiny, of his past. He shows him and tries to give him essentially his father's lightsaber. And this happens right before Luke refuses the call. That's why I'm saying it happens like Luke doesn't immediately refuse it. He meets the mentor, he gets this information, he finds out that someone needs to save the galaxy, which, crazy enough, is exactly what Luke should want to do, right? Because he's this bored kid who wants to get off of this desert planet. But once you give someone exactly what they want and you show them, like, how many people do we see like get exactly what they want and then they fall apart because they're not ready. They're not ready for it. They haven't been properly prepared to get this thing, right? So Obi-Wan tries to give him the lightsaber, but Luke is scared. Luke will come up with whatever excuse it is, but he's not ready for it. So he refuses the call, even with this great information, this great motivation that he's getting from this new and very powerful mentor that he meets with. So once we've gotten through this thing, we know the ordinary world. We know what's been thrown out of balance and what's calling our hero to try to fix this world. And the character, when they get the information, they refuse the call and or get the information that could get them ready to deal with this call to adventure before they're willing to take their first step. Now, all of this has been about trying to kind of shake the hero out of their beige existence to get them to kind of set off on the first steps of this journey. They haven't really done it yet until they reach this point that's at about 3 o'clock right here, which is, part number 5 of this whole 12-part journey, which is crossing the threshold. So the threshold is the space that separates your ordinary world from your fantastic world. From your ordinary world, from the journey that's going to eventually take this character on the path to deal with the problem that's the central ordeal, right? The character can't immediately be ready to do that, as we've talked about, because that feels unnatural. It doesn't feel earned. It doesn't feel like this character has somehow gotten ready. But this is the point, like in Star Wars, it's the point where Luke realizes he can't turn a blind eye to the evils of the Empire, because what happens when he goes home? He finds his aunt and uncle burned alive because the Empire was out searching for this. And that's what makes him ready to cross the threshold. With Indiana Jones, what makes him ready to cross the threshold? When he discovers that his father has been kidnapped and is in over his head. And Indiana, even in that instance, there could have still been a step when Indiana could have pulled back. But he found that his father had specifically sent to him his Grail diary, the key to unlocking the mysteries of this whole thing. And that's the moment when he knew he was the only one who could make the difference, the only one who could face this problem, and he can't turn a blind eye to it anymore. So that's the moment when the character is willing to take their first step out the door to face this problem. They're not ready to face the problem yet, but they're ready, that they can no longer deny that they have to do something to stop this, right? So we then cross the threshold, right? We've gotten the character ready to the point where they're willing to do this. They take this first step and they start going into this fantastical world, this world that is different from their normal, safe, ordinary world. In Star Wars, what happens? They go to Mos Eisley. They go to what do they call it? There's no more wretched hive of scum and villainy in all of the galaxy, or something like that. That's them crossing into a much different world than the safe, calm, water farming existence living out in the desert. There's no turning back now, right? And when we go, and this is why there's this line here. This line here is a difference between what's ordinary and what's fantastical. The problem that the character is going to have to face will always be in this fantastical world. It always has to be at the center, the heart of the cave here. But now that we've crossed a little bit into, starting to head towards this cave, we've really got to get ready to be able to face this dangerous thing that's at, that's at the center here. So what happens when they go to Mos Eisley in Star Wars? They're tested. When they go in there and they meet the stormtroopers who are on the lookout for their droids, and they're tested. Are you worthy to continue going on? And they find that they have, his mentor has these magical abilities, and they can kind of, talk certain people into things, but they're tested. They meet allies. They meet allies in the form of Han Solo and Chewbacca. They get people who are going to help them go on this journey. Indiana Jones has the same thing. When he goes and crosses the threshold into this, to head over to Europe to go save his father, he brings, I can't remember the guy's name, but he brings that one guy who helps him, and he meets Dr. Elsa once he gets off the boat in Venice, who, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's on you. She ends up being a bit of a shapeshifter, and she turns into a bit of an enemy. But we are meeting allies. We're also meeting enemies at this time. They meet a lot of enemies in Mos Eisley and barely get out of there with their skin intact as they're, as they escape on the Millennium Falcon, right? But this has tested them to see, are you worthy to continue on this journey? And every single one of these tests, every single one of these allies and these enemies that they meet, teach the protagonist, teaches him a bit more about him or herself, right? Because we incorporate the strengths of the allies that come to our aid. We learn things when we're tested facing our enemies. And all of these things, again, getting us ready to deal with this central problem, okay? Number 7, once we, and these things can be kind of spread out through this whole way. We can have tests, allies, and enemies throughout this whole thing. We can even meet tests, allies, and enemies in here, which does happen. But this is all to get the hero prepared, right? And the mentor is a bit of an ally. You can have dark mentors too who turn into enemies. That's exactly what happens with Indiana Jones. The guy who sets him out to go on this journey, who he thinks is a bit of a mentor and a patron for him, who's going to finance his journey, is actually the guy who is trying to get this thing for the Nazis. He turns into this dark mentor, right? So, and even you could say a bit of that is like Han Solo. Han Solo is kind of, he abandons them in a great time of need later. But at this point, we don't know that yet, right? Then this section right here, the approach, is factored actually into this whole portion right here, because the approach is really ultimately how are we getting closer to this cave, to this central problem, this demon, this monster that we have to deal with ultimately. But we're getting closer, we're getting ready. This is all about our approach. When it comes to, what happens in Star Wars, they are literally approaching the Death Star, right? It's very obvious what's happening there. And they have to approach, even when they get to the Death Star, it's a deeper and deeper approach until they reach like that central, the central problem, which is kind of rescuing the princess from Darth Vader and potentially facing Darth Vader, right? So this central ordeal that we've kind of hinted at from the top of this is the thing that the hero has to get ready, or has to be ready to do by this point. This is the midpoint of your story. This is the point where, in all of these, or not all of these, but in quite a few bits of folklore and mythology around the world, this is the point where the character goes into the heart of the cave, the heart of the beast, and they potentially die and are allowed to be reborn. There's all these myths throughout the world and in religion about people who are like swallowed by whales or giant sea creatures. same concept here. You are in the heart of this dangerous world that you've gone into, and you're facing this central problem that was designed specifically for you to face. Okay? Luke Skywalker is not really ready to face it. Darth Vader is the thing that he needs to face, and we find out why, and you find out really why much later, or not much later, but in the next movie of the whole series. Obi-Wan ends up taking this for him, but the whole central ordeal, saving the princess, because Call to Adventure was what? About saving the princess and defeating the Empire. This is what they're trying to do here. And usually the character, like I kind of hinted at before, they're going to face this, but they're not going to fully win. Very often they lose right here. Some big part of what they're doing is lost. They lose Obi-Wan Kenobi right here. They lose the person who had these, all these magical powers and this ability to make things happen. Like the person who, you would think, like when you first see that movie, and when people first saw that movie, it was devastating to lose Alec Guinness, and people weren't expecting that at all. So what happens here, like you face this problem, you face a central ordeal, and then we have to figure out how to deal with the aftermath and incorporate the lessons that we've learned, right? So this is what this reward thing is about. You've earned something from this. Like they earned the princess, right? But their journey isn't over. They saved the princess, but it's not over yet. There's this road back where they really have this opportunity to do what needs to be done, because ultimately it wasn't about saving the princess, right? It was about allowing Leia to deliver the Death Star plans to the rebellion, right? So that the rebellion could ultimately defeat the Empire, or defeat the Death Star at least. So this road back is, the character is going to be, it's a little different in Star Wars because in the road back, they actually have to go back to the Death Star. But in most of these road back things, like if you think of an archetypical story, like if the hero's gone into the cave to fight the dragon, they're going to be chased by demons or the dragon on the way back. Like if they've gone in to go fight the dragon and get the treasure, maybe they've gotten the treasure is in hand, but now they have to flee back to their ordinary world with whatever this treasure is to try to incorporate it, but they're being pursued along the way. They're being pursued by the bad guys. And this is, sorry, hold on a second here. Just something distracted me real quick here. So this is the point where they have one last opportunity to incorporate these lessons that hopefully they've learned here, to really bring this reward back home. So there's one last fight that they have to go through. And really, what is Luke's last fight that he has to go through? Luke's last fight is, this whole journey for him was not about saving a princess, was not about leaving his world behind. It was about accepting his destiny as basically like the last hope for the galaxy, as the last like Jedi, really, right? So his resurrection, his climax, the thing that the movie is really ultimately all about, is Luke being willing to trust his instincts when it comes to the Force. That's why, in order to defeat the Death Star, defeat Darth Vader, all of those things at the very end, he hears Obi-Wan Kenobi one last time saying, use the fork, Luke. Or fork. Use the Force, Luke. You could use the fork too. But use the Force, and he's finally, after this entire journey that he's gone on, he's seen how powerful the Force can be, because Obi-Wan is still a presence to him even after he has died. The thing that he learned in the Central Ordeal. He knows that this is a real thing now. Now he just has to trust himself with it. And once he's able to do that, he's able to, what is Return with the elixir here, defeat the Death Star, save the galaxy, get rewarded, and put his ordinary world back into some semblance of order. It's never going to be exactly the same for the hero, right? It will never be exactly the same because they have changed. Their world was thrown out of balance so that they could grow, but now they've come back with the ability to keep their world safe. And that's exactly what Luke was able to do. It's exactly what Indiana Jones is able to do at the very end of, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This is what all of these stories are ultimately about. Like, Star Wars and Indiana Jones are very heightened versions of like this hero's journey. They're very archetypical in the way that they almost perfectly follow this sort of structure. But this structure is also in, very dramatic, like ordinary dramatic films. Like, I like to use the example of American Beauty quite a bit. And let's use the example of American Beauty to look at the other side of this whole hero's journey paradigm. Because this is the external journey that the character has gone on. This is what they're doing, okay? This is the external actions that they're taking to solve that sort of like external plot journey. But there's a whole other part to this that maps directly over this, and that's the character arc. So hold on one moment. I'm going to bring up the character arc diagram here. Now, let's go back into share, and we'll use this one. Share. All right, do we see this one now? See how it's another circle, but different. So I've got my cursor here now. Again, you know how I told you, like the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 thing, like this, it's not a perfect map in all cases, right? But notice, so this is the character arc, whereas the other one was the hero's journey. But notice something here. As we go all the way through here, there are, if you count all these up, there are 12 steps here. The character arc, the way the character grows, directly maps to what they're doing outside of themselves to solve the central problem that they're faced with in their outer world. Let's take a look at maybe something like American Beauty to give you an example of this. American Beauty follows the hero's journey as well. It might be easier to see it, or a different way to look at it is the character arc for Kevin Spacey's character, Lester Burnham, right? So have we seen American Beauty? Is there anyone who hasn't? Like, I hate to call someone out if they haven't, but just so I know how to explain things. So we've all seen it. Okay. Lester Burnham is this guy who lives in her beige, ordinary world. He has the same exact routine every single day. He's in this limited awareness about who he is and what is possible for himself. He's definitely stuck in this ordinary world and, is just kind of at this 12 o'clock thing right here. But what happens when we get to this increased awareness thing, increased awareness directly maps onto the call to adventure. So call to adventure for Lester Burnham is kind of a couple things that are happening at once. One of them is, he's potentially going to lose his job. He's facing this job review. But the thing that gives him, unfortunately, even a greater increased awareness of something that he's lost, because that's really what his journey is about. His journey is ultimately about, I am someone who's trapped. I feel like I've lost something in my past, and I want to get it back. And you literally hear him say those things. It's never too late to get it back, is the thing that he says right around the time when he commits or crosses the threshold. But what really increases his awareness is when he has that fantasy about his daughter's friend. This young girl who represents the life that he felt he had once, the life that he's left behind in order to be, this family guy. He thinks he's trapped in this family that has completely left him behind. This family that's doing its own thing, that couldn't care less how he feels or what he thinks or what he's doing. But this increased awareness here is that there's maybe a way I can get my past back. I can maybe change. He's going to be a little reluctant to overcome it or to really go into it. The other thing that increases his awareness definitely is meeting Ricky Fitz, the new neighbor that moves in right next door to him. He meets him, and once those things start to line up, he's willing to overcome this sort of reluctance to change. He overcomes it and then starts committing to being someone different. When he commits to being something different, he starts working out, you know, he commits to smoking pot. He goes and purposefully quits his job. It's all of these things that are happening at once. And he then starts really experimenting, right? He goes out of his way to get the job with the least amount of responsibility. He tests the waters with how he interacts with his wife now. And he starts to feel like he's really getting ready to do the thing that he wants to do. He's preparing himself for this big change. In his mind, which is really disturbing, his big change is, because what is it? The daughter's friend says to him, or not says to him, but he overhears his daughter and her friend saying, or the friend saying, if your dad would work out and was a little buffer, I'd totally fuck him. And that's the thing he's trying to prepare himself for, which for all sorts of different reasons is kind of disturbing, right? So this movie spends a lot more time with this portion of it, and then it kind of truncates this whole part of it. And some of that is a result of it being a little bit of a tragedy, because tragically, Lester Burnham dies at the end. Like, it doesn't end with a totally happy ending. The big change that happens for him here is when he, at least the way I see it, is when he finally gets the opportunity to sleep with his daughter's friend. Like, things have finally lined up for him, and he has her down in the downstairs living room. No one else is in the darkened house, and he's about to have sex with her, right? And right when he reaches this point, what does she say to him? He thinks that she's this, this representation of untamed, like, youthful sexuality and willing to do all these things with him. And she finally shows her true vulnerability right at the last minute and says, basically, I've never done this before. To Lester Burnham's credit, when that happens, he doesn't continue on with his lechery, right? He suddenly has a realization. And he realizes this is where he's dealing with the consequences of hearing that, of facing that thing. He's like, wait a minute, what am I doing? This is messed up. This is a child. I'm not right. This is not right. I've totally gone off the deep end by going into this abnormal, unordinary world. And he encourages her to get dressed, sends her off on her way, and he goes into the kitchen. He goes into the kitchen, sits down at the table, and he looks at this picture that's on that kitchen table. And it's a picture of him with his daughter and his wife in one of their last happy times that he can remember. And at that moment, he finally realizes what he was missing the whole time. What he was missing the whole time, and this is his final attempt, his ability to reach mastery here, he finally realizes it wasn't about my family trapping me. It was about me abdicating my role of living in my life and being a presence in my family. I'm the one who closed myself off. I'm the one who was too focused on something else instead of living with what was right in front of me. And he to his credit, and he does realize this, and then he dies. He realizes this right before he dies, which makes it a bit of a tragedy, but at the same time, it's less tragic than if he died right before realizing it. So he did win this mastery over himself. He did learn what his limited awareness would not let him see at the very beginning. But he went through all of these different steps, which, as I said, will match up with every single thing that we talked about on the hero's journey. Increased awareness is the call to adventure. Reluctance to change is the refusal of the call. Overcoming is something that your mentor helps you do. Committing to overcoming your problem or whatever it is crossing the threshold. Experimenting is exactly what you're doing when you're meeting new allies and enemies and facing tests. When you prepare yourself, you're approaching this big change, which is the big cave, and you're dealing with the consequences, the potential reward of this, and you rededicate yourself to finally making this one last attempt to changing yourself into a different person, which is this mastery point. And then if you're able to do that by the end of the story as a protagonist, you have turned into a different person by the end of this. Again, this is getting someone from one spot to face the big change, they prepare for it, and then they deal with the consequences. It's the exact same thing. This character arc should be happening the same way that the hero's journey steps are going to be happening. You know, you want both of these layers in your stories if you want people to really feel like there's some deep transcendent meaning to them. Something that's going to make your story resonate and make people have to finish watching this and make them have to come back and see it again and make them want to tell other people that they need to read your script or that they need to watch your movie or your television show, whatever it may be. All of these things happen there. You can map this whole thing to the journey that Walter White goes through in the pilot episode of Breaking Bad. You know, this structure is classic for a reason. And this is what I want to help you all see and kind of not conform to, but maybe sharpen up a bit more in your own outlines. And if you're, you know, a lot of people will sit down and kind of just, you know, they'll put a blindfold on themselves basically and walk through the forest trying to beat out their own path. But look at the, you know, take the blindfold off, look at the pathways that have kind of been built before, but make your own way through it knowing that, you know. These are I found them very valuable to use, and whenever I'm advising people, you know, if any of you are have been in other groups that I've done or are ever in any other like group mentorship with me or, you know, one-on-one mentorships or things like that, this is my secret. It's not really a secret, it's just you incorporate these things, and this is when you have a deep understanding of it, you can really make powerful effects happen in your stories. Okay? So, with that sort of thing in mind, let's take a look at the pieces that I have from people for this week. And what we may want to try to do, because like I said, so much of this, like, let's spend the time with the outlines before rushing into pages. Some of you will be closer to this sort of format than others. Everyone's on their own time frame, their own time schedule, so no one's better than anyone else if they have it closer to this or not. But let's just really kind of see how these things can map out and really help give your story this kind of really resonating journey. So who would like to go first with that? I see Jim, and forgive me, am I calling you Jim or James? I'm sorry. Let's unmute. Let's see, unmute. There you are.
Either or is fine.
Okay. So let's take a look at yours is the clinic, right?
Correct.
Okay. And, you know, important to note that with yours, we are dealing with a pilot. So we're dealing with something that is setting up a series. And like I said, even something like Breaking Bad will engage with these steps, okay? The key, though, is once you get a character to potentially face mastery, it opens up another can of worms for them. You know, one thing I'd like you all to do, even if you've done it before, but by the time we come back to the next session, I hope you all have Netflix. If not, I understand. But if you do, please watch the pilot for Glow.
Already did.
Okay? You may have seen it before, but go and watch it again and see and in whether you're watching it again or whether whether this is the first time you've seen it, look at how Glow maps so closely to this, but is a pilot for a series. And what Glow does very well is once we get to this this sort of mastery point, this final attempt, it opens up a whole new can of worms that makes us have to come back again. You know?
Right.
So take a look at that, and that's something we'll, you know, for your pilot, I'd encourage us to do as well, right? So when I was reading, I'll give you some of my thoughts as to, you know, what I saw in your outline, and then maybe we can brainstorm a little bit on whether there's more we can do in terms of the character arc or the typical hero's journey thing. But the thing that drew me in most to your outline now, I felt like, you know, you did well by making her start to feel a little more culpable in what's happening here. Like I mentioned last week, it felt like problems were coming at her doorstep, but she was just kind of the victim of circumstance. But to make her feel like the active protagonist, she needs to be somewhat responsible in making that happen. So, excuse me, I felt like one of the best parts here that you brought in to make her feel more culpable is the way that she wants, you know, she wants to take the job once she realizes that she will be over other people, including her cheating lover, right? Because that plays right into like her megalomania, like her maybe a bit of it that's under there, or this desire for power, things like that. So this, I think, is the real key to unlocking what her character journey could be over the course of this. And similar sort of power dynamic happens for so many characters that, you know, in these dark sorts of, you know, true crime type stories. Walter White, we ultimately realize he's not out to help his family. He's not out to get the, you know, the money for his family. He loves the power. He's the man who knocks. And that's finally made him feel like a full person once he realizes he gets to that point. But he doesn't fully engage with, or he doesn't fully realize that in the pilot. But if we're very astute and observational when we watch it, you know, look at how Walter White begins Breaking Bad, the pilot for Breaking Bad, and where he ends up. The real key to unlocking the understanding of Walter White's character is his relationship with his wife, because he's a very, you know, he's been put into this very passive role in his marriage, to the point where on his 50th birthday, when he's in bed with his wife at the end of that night, after he's been kind of embarrassed in his own birthday party by everyone who is there, he's there with his wife, and she starts giving him a hand job, but she's not even paying attention. She's barely paying attention to it, and he can't really have sex with her. Like, it's like the relationship is so messed up. The end of that pilot, though, once he's gone on this journey of doing this dangerous thing and he's felt some power, what does he do when he comes home? He comes home, fucks his wife. He's now in this dominant position with her, and that's the key to unlocking what his whole journey is ultimately going to be about, is him feeling like he's back in power. So with her, this, you know, feeling of being a bit power hungry or greedy or something can give you a good dynamic between that greed or that hunger for power and her kind of self-righteousness. Because she also takes this on a bit of a self-righteous thing where she thinks she's in it to do good, to save her son. But ultimately it's about, you know, this desire for power. And if you have that dynamic really resonating throughout this whole pilot and really throughout your series, you've got the workings of a complex character who can surprise us in all of these different scenarios that you'll put her in. Because it will be about this inner war that she has between her desire for, you know, being a do-gooder or doing the right thing, and what she's ultimately really underneath it actually pursuing, which is this sense of power, or this sense of greed, or whatever it may be. you can't let it completely rear its head. Like if she comes off as this greedy, power-hungry monster at the beginning, we're not going to identify with her. But we see little hints of it. She becomes this complex, interesting character that we can see ourselves in. Because we all do that to some degree, right? Like we all want things that make us feel like bigger people, no matter how, no matter how much we may try to convince ourselves and others that, oh, I'm just doing this for the good of others.
Right.
Even you could say there's selfish motivations for everything that we do, even when it comes down to people volunteering and doing supposedly altruistic things, because people are doing that very often to make themselves feel good about themselves.
Exactly.
So what is she doing there? And that's where you can really like hold a mirror up to the people who are watching it too. And I think that's the sort of thing where, to make that really pay off, you want to play up the poor treatment that she receives in her ordinary world from the people that she works with and her lover at the clinic, the guy that she has this relationship with. So her kind of limited awareness, her ordinary world should be about this, she's kind of trapped in this sort of, kind of what Lester Burnham had been doing, what Walter White had been doing. They're trapped in this, this dynamic of people maybe taking advantage of them or not taking it seriously or whatever it may be, right? And so the increased awareness becomes about this sort of, potential for power that she has. This call to adventure is a guy telling her, I can make you the head of this clinic. But she has to be reluctant for that at first. She can't immediately go into that. And I think you built in a little bit of that already, but make sure that that's kind of paying, you're really engaging with that. It's like she shouldn't immediately be willing to want to do that until something pushes her over the edge. Maybe that's when she discovers her lover's cheating on her, and maybe for a promotion or something like that. That's the moment where she's maybe ready to overcome it. And she's like, you know what? I have the opportunity to set things right and make people do what they should be doing. So I'm going to commit to working with this guy. I'm going to close my eyes off to seeing who he really is. But he can give me what he wants.
Right.
And then you got to make it a little fun, I think, for her as she goes into it. Same way that it's a little fun for Walter White, or a little fun for Lester Burnham when they really cross the threshold. Like she should feel like she's doing the right thing to begin with, that she could be making it with this clinic, and that people are, listening to her, and things are going well for her. But then the big change comes when she, realizes who she's gotten metaphorically in bed with in terms of who's given her the job.
Right.
And then it's, I feel at some point you could even have in this section right here, this final attempt in this mastery sort of thing here, could be, it should be multi-layered, right? But it could be something where, she self-righteously goes back to this guy, the guy who's given the mafia guy who is giving, or the crime lord guy who's giving her this opportunity, and she could self-righteously say, like, what you're doing is wrong, I can't be party to this, or or something like that, where maybe he gives her the chance to walk away, or maybe he finally confronts her with, hey, you knew what you were getting into, like you're in this because you want to make a difference, right? Because you want the power to be able to do this. I'm the one who can do it for you. All these other people are crooks too. They're taking advantage of you. They're holding you down. So it's something right here where she really finally, commits to going off on this journey for the course of the series, which is going to, yes, lead her to more problems. Maybe she thinks she can outwit this guy, but this sort of mastery thing has to somehow go along with this dynamic of her not willing to totally admit that she's power hungry, but she's clearly not willing to step away from this offer for power. Like it's no longer no longer a mask over what's happening. She fully is like, you know what? I have to stick with this. You know,
Got it.
we may, and we probably should still feel at that moment that like, you should run away from this. The right thing to do is run away from this. But we should just as easily see that this will give you exactly what you want. It'll give you exactly what you think you need. You know?
Right.
So along the way too, make sure that we have a reason to deeply care about her son. Okay? So if a lot of this on the surface, like the way she's going to convince herself that she's doing the right thing is about doing this for the sake of her son, then we have to spend time with the two of them together.
Okay.
He can't just be an idea, a concept, an afterthought that, oh, I have a son that is important to me. We need to feel that with her to be fully on her side. We need to feel how much her son means to her by seeing the two of them together and seeing things, you know, meaningful for them. And that's something we shouldn't be able to lose sight of throughout this. But if it's just this off-screen presence, this concept, this abstract idea, we're not going to feel it deeply. You know?
Right.
So, let me see here. And look to the way that they do it in, you know, both Breaking Bad and Glow. If you go and watch it again this week.
Okay.
Glow takes and Breaking Bad show us exactly what dynamic we're going to be dealing with the characters, but they leave the biggest problems unsolved. And by realizing, like when your character gets to this mastery point in the pilot, it just lets a whole new set of problems come out that will propel us into episode 2 and the rest of the season. So that's something to be working with in yours as well, you know?
Right. Yeah, because
does that help? Does that make sense? Is there anything kind of unclear there? Or
no, that makes a whole lot of sense. I was going to say one of the other things that, because since you mentioned the son, that I was really looking forward to trying to bring up is that when she realizes that Cortez is responsible for getting her ex-husband busted, and he could potentially lose custody of his son altogether. It's because of her son's reaction that makes her that yanks her back to reality. That kind of makes her like, oh well, I can't take his father away from him. You know, knowing just the thought of knowing that, even though the son would never know it, just her thought of knowing that would just like overwhelm her with guilt. Yeah. So that kind of keeps her that keeps that sort of saving grace about her, if you will. It makes her. It doesn't make her the monster that Cortez is, but we see that, you know, when she's realized, oh my God, I've crossed this line, I got to figure out a way to bring it back. And of course, Cortez will be like, you know, hey, look, you know, you don't want him to go to jail, fine, you know, but you know that, you know, I did what you asked me to do. You wanted help, so you know, so she knows that she's kind of walking that line all the time.
Okay, cool. Well,
no, everything else I think is right on point with. And the thing with her reasoning for accepting the job, I think that's a great note, because that sort of spurs everything going forward to how her character arc not only changes because she becomes a little bit obsessed with the power, but once she realizes what the cost is, week after week she still chooses that. You know, even though she's trying to do the right thing, like you said, trying to be self-righteous, but she still chooses the darkness no matter what.
Exactly. Cool. Well, yeah, I think you've, I think yours can map very easily to this sort of thing. And again, you know, it's a general map that you want to kind of follow here. It doesn't have to be perfect, exactly on point and exactly certain page count this, page count that, but you know, this general structure works for a reason, you know?
Right, it does.
Same way, like, you know, if you listen to, there's a reason popular music, like pop music, is a lot more popular than experimental jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there's a perfect, it comes down to the structure.
Right, exactly.
So the structure is familiar, we can play, like once we know what to expect in structure,
Yeah.
you can play with tension as, you know, people are expecting this to happen, but then you surprise us a little bit in the way that you go with that, but you still hew closely to what that structure is. The problem with something like jazz is you need such a specialized understanding of music theory to really, truly
Right.
enjoy it, that it's not something that most people can kind of dive into.
Right, because you
Not just
can't
that,
just
but
lay
like,
back. Yeah.
yeah, like experimental, like progressive rock is like that too. Like there's all sorts of examples of music like that that you need very special. And it's same thing with movies. Like, you know, there's a reason why Terrence Malick movies don't make money, right? Because
Right.
they're just these meandering tone poems that may be beautiful to look at and may have somewhere buried deep within there, because he still does use movie structure, but it's buried so deeply in there that people
Right.
just can't relate to it and can't access it. So that's why he can spend a couple $1 million to make a big film with Christian Bale, and you know, it only makes $16,000 opening
Right.
weekend,
Ooh,
right?
Yeah.
So
Right. But that's what he wants.
yeah, and but he doesn't. It's harder for him to get money now.
Oh,
So,
much harder. Yeah, definitely.
So there we go. Okay, well, I hope that's helpful. And
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate it. That was extraordinarily helpful for me.
great, fantastic. So who would like to go next? Oh, I can't see everybody. So, oh, is that? Sorry. Why am I not? I'm not able to see your names when I do this thing.
No
here.
one's volunteering. I will, Chris.
No. I see someone raising their hand. Why can I not?
I think it was Kyle.
Kyle.
All
there
right, Carl, go first. No problem.
Yeah, your names are starting to come up a little bit again. But okay, so Kyle, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that, Kyle.
No worries. Sorry. It's trying to wave my hand, but I don't know who was going who.
It's
First.
weird with this, the way that this Zoom room is. Oh, well, is that working? No, it doesn't show me everybody. Hold on a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. It only show me 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, no, this one will show me 5 people at once. There we go. Sorry about that. So let's see here. So we're talking about the last tour, right?
Yeah.
And I think yours is decently close to what we've been dealing with here. And you, as we talked about last week, you have built in these constant subversions of expectations with different things. I think where maybe we can, we can kind of clarify some of these a little bit is more in this sort of like Act 3 section, because I'm not quite clear totally like, where we, like this, it's this part of the clock here that I'm not fully sensing what it is yet. So well, first let me ask you a question. Like, you did some updates on your outline. What did you end up focusing on here?
Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to go the unpredictable route of like, before I had that, you had Dean, who was just like, at the end, he kind of betrayed her and he found her wire pretty much. And I just said, something's not right. I just don't feel that he would do that. And so I kind of decided to go this other route while she has so much going on, the character of Kat, that what if there's always that suspicion throughout her journey trying to get the money that went missing to kind of put out that fire, and then the IA is on top of her, have this kind of tension. Well, does Dean know? Does he know what's going on? I can't give him up, but does he know already? And kind of have this sneaking suspicion. And I wanted to pretty much bring it all the way to the last act where the drop off is being made to Victor.
Okay.
And this kind of gangster. And what ends up happening, which I think is really cool, to me at least, what I liked is that what you really find out about why Dean is so sneaky and kind of sketchy that night is that what he does is he is pretty much kind of setting himself up for working with other clientele of protection, gangsters in the area besides Victor, and Victor won't have it and kind of offs him right then and there. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a lead up to what Kat thinks might happen, and it doesn't happen at all. And thus, an IA, Internal Affairs, is not there to help her at the last moment. And kind of her being on her own to face this criminal who she's been working for a while, and the moral question throughout the night to do the right thing kind of lands right there to take action for her own. So that's kind of where I wanted the journey of Dean and her to be left off, or tried something a little bit different. Is that clear, or am I like confused?
No, I think so. Let's talk through a little bit of this then. So I think one thing you've done, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I'm just imagining it here, but she seems a little bit more accessible this time, and it feels a little bit more like the audience can kind of stay on her side through this. And I guess my question is, so when, or a couple questions here. Yeah, I have a lot of questions, I guess. So how much farther does the story go once her partner is shot? And is he actually dead? Or can this be like the new chance that she has to kind of redeem herself and him at the same time? Looking at this, like, let's say we're looking at this character arc diagram that we have up. Like, at what point along this diagram would you say where the partner's shot? Is it more like in this area, or is it like right here? Where would you say that kind of ends up?
Probably in the third act, right around, right after. Hold on,
well, probably just kind of like in this area. Third act is kind of enough to say, because that's like that's a big moment that ends up happening here. Okay.
Well, the reason being is something I did not put in the outline, which is because I already have pages on this, but yet again, you know, I'm taking from what I already have. In the beginning in the first act, when we're introducing the world, there's a kid that shoplifts a local store, and the shoplifter's freaking out. I mean, the owner of the store is freaking out, and she takes the kid aside, and you actually realize in their dialogue that they know each other, that this kid is like, hey, he's pretty much stealing to survive. And she kind of gives him $20, and he's like, you know, she's like, where's your mom? He's like, where do you think? You know, his mom's, you know, kind of an absentee kind of mother. And she takes care of the kid, and the kid pretty much in the way they talk is like, will this ever change? You know, is there ever like, because she kind of gives him the cop feel good speech, like, you know, I'll be all right, everything will be all right. And the kid goes, really? Will it? You know, it's the south side of Williamsburg. It's never going to be better. And she's like, he's like, is that bullshit they teach you at the academy? She's like, yeah, it is. And what ends up happening is at the very end, because you also are introduced to another character who's very much rowdy, that those cops cannot touch because he is protected by Victor, this kind of gangster, and they can't really arrest him. But yet again, this guy feels like he can do whatever he wants. He can boss the cops around, yada, yada, yada. And her whole moral question the whole night is do the right thing. And so by the beginning of the third act, when they get the money, they get one last call to go to this local bodega where there was a shootout. And come to find out that guy who caused the shootout was this kind of guy who thought he was a tough gangster, that he was protected by Vic. He kind of caused it, and in the middle of it was the kid who died, who actually had the money that she gave him to go buy some food, that he actually, because his brother was not feeling good, went to go get something to eat properly to buy it, taking her word to do the right thing, and was killed. And that causes her to say, you know what? I'm going to do the right thing morally tonight by the citizens who I've neglected. And that kicks her into the third act, and thus, you know, the suspicion of Dean, what is he going to do? And he ends up...
that kicks her into the third act. So it sounds like the big kind of change, the central ordeal, is facing the fact that, like, this kid died or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that's the big thing, and she hasn't fully incorporated all of the lessons of that thing, but it allows her to go into the third act with the potential for that. And then it's about dealing with the fallout with, you know, when the partner ends up getting shot and what she finally ends up doing there, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, as a character journey internally for her, that's kind of what moves it.
Okay.
To the third
Okay.
act for her.
Gotcha. Okay. So what would you say, you know, what does she end up learning by the end of this? Is it, you know, if it's deeply tied to that kid, does she end up realizing that, like, she's not going to lie and bullshit people anymore because she lied and bullshitted that kid? She's lied, you know, been lying and bullshitting her partner and IA. Like, she's been trapped in this web of lies. That sounds like one potential, you know, way to go there. But, like, I guess my question is, in terms of her character arc, what does she end up having this sort of mastery over by the very end? Like, what has changed internally about her by going on this journey?
To do the right thing for once in her 10-year career as a cop.
So, I guess, okay, so do we show to do the right thing? But can we go a little deeper than that? Because when I hear, like, do the right thing, you know, besides, you know, Spike Lee, I think that people, we all think we're doing the right thing, even people doing bad things, right? So I guess, you know, beyond just that, like, something is drawing her into viewing the right thing as in a way that doesn't match up with what everyone else thinks is right. You know, like, what has I'd encourage you to look a little deeper into why is it that you know, because she didn't wake up. None of us really wake up thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be a bad person today. I can't wait to do that." Even if everybody else in the world thinks that we are bad people, there's some reason that she's justified what it is that she's doing in her head. So it feels like the thing that she should realize by the end of this is that whatever she used to justify those actions is not correct. You know, that's, and really it is the ultimate, like, do the right thing, but underneath that, what does that actually mean? You know, because most dirty cops, I'm sure, have told themselves in their head that this is the right thing to do. This is what you have to do to keep order, to keep your job, to keep people safe. It's like, you can't play black and white cops and robbers. You have to understand that the world works in shades of gray. So, you know what I mean? Like, what is it that changes that sort of view in her head to make her really fully realize that, you know, doing the right thing means doing, you know, or changing my perspective on what I think, you know? It just feels like to me there's a bit more you could go with there.
Yeah.
You already know what that is, but I guess I wasn't sensing that fully yet from the outline yet.
Okay. I mean,
and we
for
may
her,
not have the answer for that right now. It's just something I want to encourage you to think about.
no, it's great. I mean, for her, for the long run, the reason why she did it is because she's got a husband who is handicapped and a newborn. So, you know, that's kind of what led her into it. And Dean's whole reason of why he became corrupt was he kind of was the guy, and it opens up with this too, is that he's the kind of guy who gets always passed over by promotion in the police ranking, kind of always kind of looked down a little bit. And this is kind of a way of, like, for him kind of gaining power. And then he saw what she needed.
So is it maybe like realizing the ends don't justify the means, maybe? Is it like, because if you're saying that she's doing this because she has a handicapped husband and she's got this disabled child, or you know, things like that, it sounds to me like she's making the decision that what I need is better than what the rules are, you know? But you could see, like, I can see why someone like that would think it's justified. It's like, I'm not getting paid enough as a cop.
Mm-hmm.
I have to take care of my family. It would be wrong of me to not take care of my family. So, you know what I mean? Like, where's the, because if she's doing the right thing, then is she no longer doing the right thing for her family? You know?
Yeah, that's the question a little bit.
So that's why I'm wondering if it's something deeper than just like doing the right thing, because I mean, I guess this will show you what a relativist I am, but right and wrong can mean so many different things to so many different people, because it's all based on our individual context, our culture, and our upbringing, and where our lives are at this particular moment in time.
Yeah.
So what is it that convinces her that what she was doing in the past is not the way she should continue doing it? And I'm just wondering, the reason I was thinking, like, my mind was going to the lies sort of thing, is I can totally see how people will cut corners because they think it's not going to be a big deal. People will tell little white lies because, and we all do to some extent, where it's like, oh, no, you don't look fat in that dress. Like, we all tell these little lies about little things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it's in the context of maybe working for a, social institution or a government institution like the police, maybe we can't really engage in that much lying. And maybe there is some part of her that's even lying to her family, because she is lying to her partner. She is lying to internal affairs at some point. She does lie to that kid by feeding him bullshit about that stuff. And I could just see how, maybe she's trapped in such a web of lies that, at the very end, she's like trying to still keep that web of lies together, but she sees what damage it's doing when it ends up killing her partner. And so she realizes the ultimate sacrifice I need to make is I got to tell the truth, and I will tell the truth with my family. We'll find our way through it. Because then she's not betraying her family by, suddenly not providing for them. Like, I think there's more that could be done there.
Yeah.
It's complex stuff, but that also tells me you've got a story that could be very meaningful and should be told and will engage people with these difficult issues, and that's what's going to keep people talking about and thinking about a project like this, is that it doesn't just have her doing just the right thing. It really gets to the heart of, what does that actually mean? Because like the person who starts embezzling from the company that they're working at, they usually don't do it initially thinking that, oh, I can't wait to do wrong by these people. They usually find some way to justify it and think and convince themselves over time, as they do more and more of it, that they're doing the right thing. But eventually they're so in over their heads that the only way out is, or one of the only ways out is kind of sacrificing themselves to that altar of truth. Sorry, I didn't want to go that kind of pretentious, but it just came out.
No, it's all good. I like the idea of the web of lies and kind of coming to fruition that maybe this is just bullshit that I'm feeding myself, that I am doing the right thing by them, and and in a way the third act could just be her kind of doing the truth. I for some reason I just thought it'd be really funny of just her kind of just showing the guy the wire the truth. I don't know.
There are lots of different ways to do it. I'm just trying to encourage you to think of a thread like that. If it's about lies, the reason it stands out to me is because that could tie together so many of the other elements that you have going on in here. But there may be another thread like that does it. I guess I'm a little, with all due respect to everybody, little unsatisfied with just saying it's like the right thing to do, because I think we can get a little deeper into human motivation, and I know you can go there with this. And that's the thing that will really make people think with this. As they feel, as they're surprised, they won't be able to stop thinking about the dynamics of the story.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So just, wrestle with it a bit more, I would say, and see what you can pull out. And I would, just continue otherwise doing what you're doing, and, kind of stick with this, these sorts of maps a little bit. And we'll have a whole other way to look at it again next week, that everyone will see. But dealing with the same sorts of concepts.
Real quick, I just want to actually add, I might not be here next week because I might be on a shoot and it might be going late.
Gotcha.
But
the recording will be there, and the first half of it, just the same way that we've done this, we'll go over something like this, a different way to look at these concepts, and we're going to talk very deeply also about defying expectations and why that's so important and how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Right.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I'll keep you updated, and I'll send you an updated draft for this outline too.
Sounds good.
Yeah, awesome. Cool, man. Thank you.
All right. Let me put this back so I can actually see everybody. Okay, who would like to go next? All right, Martin.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good, I'm good.
Just waking up, of course.
Yeah. What time is it where you're at right now?
Oh, I'm nearly awake. It's like 8:30 in the morning.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I think.
So I'm a bit of a zombie every time I do this session. So apologies for that.
No problem. It happens. Glad you can make it even with the.
Yeah, me too. It's brilliant. I was just thinking about Kyle's project because I've been reading. He sent it, and it's such a taut script potentially.
Yeah. Do you see what I mean though? How like it sets you up to expect one thing and then pulls the rug out from under you, and it keeps doing that again and again.
Yeah, completely.
Like I said to him just a moment ago, we're going to talk a lot about that next week. But you all should be doing that in your stories. Set us up to expect you're going to go one way and then swerve another direction, right? You can still do that by keeping this sort of this hero's journey kind of structure. But we all come to expect certain things are going to happen, and if we deeply identify with a character, we're going to expect things to go their way. We're going to take on their expectations. So when they don't get what they want, we'll get into a lot of that next week. But that's something I noticed, immediately in what Kyle had done with his.
There's just like I had just one thought about it, and I can't, because I did read Kyle's updated version. It was just one question about how does she end up with the wire? Is that in the outline? I can't remember.
Are you referring to the old one or the new one?
The new one.
Oh, the new one. The end up with the wire. She has the wire, but because IA's, she's in bed with internal affairs. Pretty much. Yeah.
So that's kind of my question. Why is she? How has she been caught by IA? Has she gone to them?
Yeah, but pretty much what you find out is there was a killing of an undercover cop that she felt guilty of, and eventually she decided to retire early, and they caught on to her pretty early on. It's never shown, but it's talked about within, because I already started writing pages a while ago. I didn't really specify it a lot in the outline, but actually that's a good point. I really should put it in.
Because it made me think of Goodfellas. In Goodfellas, where he gets entrapped essentially because he's been dealing shitloads of coke, and the drug squad get onto him, and then he's of course he's been in the mafia for his whole life, and to get out of the big coke dealing he's been involved with, he offers up the whole of the mob. And so I was thinking, maybe it could be something like that, something really massive.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like they catch her on it, and it's just like, either you do this for us or you're going to jail. So it's kind of that ultimatum that they give her, and her question the whole night is, do I give up my my childhood best friend, and these bad guys go away, but my best friend, and then there's my family. Do I go to jail or not be there for them?
But maybe we need to see that scene, because it's kind of about making those decisions. I was just thinking.
No, it's great. I'm writing it down right now. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Cool. It's great. It's a great outline, man. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Chris, to be distracted.
Where are you at with your outline? I've read it, but I just wanted to. Are you feeling good about it? Are you questioning things? What's where are you at, kind of emotionally with it?
I feel like it's in the early stages of development, so it's kind of like it needs a lot more thinking and work. But it feels, after the first week, I was like, well, your key question, Chris, was who's the protagonist?
Yeah.
So I had to kind of turn the whole story on its head, because I was like, well, from the way it reads when you first read it, Charlie's the protagonist, the soldier who's, for all intents and purposes, is actually a soldier. So then I was like, well, it's going to be I kind of thought that it was a story that I could run it like Ex Machina, where it's kind of deceptive at the beginning as to who the protagonist is, because you think it's the guy that goes to this facility out wherever it is in Norway where this billionaire is with the AI. But slowly as the film progresses, you realize that she's the protagonist. But it doesn't kind of work. She needed to. I want her to be the protagonist, so I had to completely redesign the story, and it took some thinking. And then after, not to make excuses for myself, but I have to say, I had this other major thing I had to do last week, and I was kind of drained, kind of creatively, and I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, where am I going to get with this? And so, but also taking on board, with the fact we were doing the hero's journey, I tried to start developing the story along those lines, going back to that. And I found that really useful, but I didn't get very far. I got to basically, where do I get to? I got to crossing the threshold, I think.
Yep. So, something that so let's try to zero in on that a little bit then, because I have a couple ideas based on my read of your outline here is, think back to when I was first on this session introducing the important points to look at, the main important points to look at whenever you're looking at like a hero's journey or any story. You need to know who your protagonist is and what is the biggest problem that they have to face. Like the big thing that is, that they need to reach, that they maybe don't realize they need to reach or don't want to reach, whatever that is, that big change, that central ordeal that they're going to have to deal with. You can come up with a good setup for these things and all that stuff, but until you know what that central thing is, that's like that central problem that the character has to deal with, it's going to be really hard to work any of these other things out. And once you know what that is, the rest of it will fall into place, because then again, it's just about preparing and then dealing with the consequences, right? So when we're looking at, because you've chosen the AI soldier to be your protagonist, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you've also chosen at the very beginning in terms of like making us relate to her and giving us her ordinary world. At least as I read it, we don't know yet, and she doesn't know yet that she's AI, right?
Yeah. So I took that on board, but you suggested that, and I thought that was a really strong idea, Chris, because I hadn't approached it from that position before. So again, took some thinking about how that would work. So yeah, that's how I tried to write it. And she kind of gets it. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So what I would say is, if you have a character who doesn't know something about themselves, then that's a very obvious thing that you can kind of run through there, right? But it could be a little too obvious. I don't know. Maybe it's not. So if you want to take like, one route you could take with this is maybe that is the big change, the big struggle, the big ordeal that she has to deal with, is coming to terms with, wait a minute, you're telling me I'm a what? So that could happen at 6 o'clock. Or she could find out who she is at the committing stage, the crossing the threshold stage. I could see a version of this story where she realizes that. But then we've got to figure out, okay, if we realize we're a robot, then what is still, we're going to have to reach some big change that's there at the very, at the 6 o'clock thing. When you cross the threshold into realizing, same thing that like, superhero origin movies, right, will often have this sort of structure where it's like someone, Spider-Man or Peter Parker or, Iron Man doesn't realize, or Superman, they don't realize who they are until they commit to crossing the threshold, but then they still have to deal with some big problem at the 6 o'clock time, or a 6 o'clock point that's going to throw, be like that big central issue that's going to propel us all the way to the end. So it could happen, at either of those stages, or you could have her not find out what she is until this final attempt thing. Like maybe there's something else that happens in the big change, but at some point in there, we've got to reveal to the audience, this is what she is. So the obvious, like, let's just, for purposes of illustration, let's take the obvious route, which is probably the cliched route to begin with, but let's find a way to hide the cliche a little bit, right? The cliche, the obvious thing would be this thing that doesn't know it's a robot learns that it's a robot and has to deal with the fallout of it, right? So that the big change would be her realizing she is AI, she is not human. So somehow, as we prepare for that, we've got to really pull the wool over the audience's eyes, okay? So we've got to have like a red herring in there, or a couple red herrings in there that keep us from realizing that she is what she is, right? So one thing I was thinking of here is because you talk a little bit in this outline about the idea of prosthetics and like robotic prosthetics.
Yeah.
So I could see something here where, and you also talk about, what is it, like PTSD. And so I could see a version of this where this woman at the beginning, maybe she realizes, and I'm just spitballing here, maybe she realizes that like she's a soldier, and she realizes that her mind works differently than other people. But to throw us off the scent, maybe she thinks that she's been given some experimental treatment for PTSD. Like maybe that's what it is. Maybe she thinks that the reason I'm able to do this and this is because I've had these upgrades that are normal, right? And so she comes to believe, and you let the audience believe, that this is ultimately about, the same reason, or the same way that we give people drugs and other sorts of experimental treatments to, treat whatever maladies that they may have if they're, if they're dealing with issues like PTSD, right? So we think it's okay, and we think it's some mundane thing like that. But then, as we get, start crossing into this threshold and learning more and more, like, I could see her thinking maybe, I could see a version of this where, she knows she's gotten some treatment for her mental issue, and when she's paired up with this other guy, he maybe has some body implants or something like that. And maybe there's a prejudice against people with those sorts of body implants or whatever because they're cheating a little bit,
Yeah, like cyborgs. That's why I was kind of hinting at that kind of thing. Right?
Yeah. Is it fair in the theater of war to have people who are outfitted with like these mechanical armor suits or things like that? And like that seems wrong. So the journey really becomes about her, we take the audience's focus in a different direction. We make them think it's somehow about her coming to terms with like being able to team up with this guy who she thinks is cheating a little bit, even though she's had some treatment herself. But then the thing becomes more and more clear where she realizes, wait a minute, I wasn't treated, I am something different. And maybe it then, somewhere in there, she like meets her maker or confronts her maker or confronts this idea that like she is not a human being, she is this robotic thing. And I could see where, you know, because what's the line then between partially mechanizing people, like if we're going to give people artificial limbs, you know, or artificial organs, what is the brain?
Absolutely.
You know? And where is the line? Where is the line?
What that I thought about. It's kind of a trajectory that I have in mind as to that. Not quite the same as that, Chris, but you know, where so essentially Charlie, you don't even know whether he's an AI and he's not sure whether he is, which is a bit like the Blade Runner scenario. I don't want to tread too heavily on that. That's the there's a lot of Blade Runner.
So that's why I'm kind of encouraging you to, even though it will go there, like make it feel like it's about something else for quite a while. Because if you tell us too quickly what it is, people who are fans of this type of story, they're going to immediately run in their heads all these different scenarios as to what it could be. And if it follows a trajectory like Blade Runner or Ex Machina closely like that, then you're going to be very dissatisfied because it's like you're just repeating what we've seen before. But if you take this to explore a different direction that we haven't dealt with before, you know, it's kind of like, you know, there's all these this controversy around like genetic manipulation of like fetuses or genetic manipulation of our own genome and things like that. Like, if we can do it, people will say, why not? We can save people disease. We can save this. If we can clone, why don't we do this? And the question, it's like, why don't we do this? But then at what point, where is that line and where is that line crossed? Because if we're completely growing artificial humans that are part robot or machine, or it's all these things that people are talking about in like Westworld, you know, the series Westworld. But I think if you can zero in on one of those specifics and make it feel like it's more about that to begin with, and then later on reveal to us she happens to be an AI, then it doesn't fall into the repeating Blade Runner trap too much or the Ex Machina trap too much. It's like you have something new to say about it because you're using this whole artificial intelligence thing as a metaphor or an allegory for something else that hasn't been fully explored by those stories yet. You know, so, and maybe it isn't the prosthetic thing or something like that, but it has to stand for something. And that's, you know, when we can close in on that more and then really, like I'm telling you, you got to figure out, so she's the protagonist. What is the biggest problem that she's going to deal with, whatever that may be? And it could maybe it isn't about discovering her identity. Maybe it's something, you know, more than that. It's like her, you know, it's her prejudice against people with, you know, I don't know. But that could kind of go into the whole, like, was Harrison Ford you know, in Blade Runner, was he
AI as well?
AI as well, even though he was out there to kill them, you know.
But so my current thought is in the big change sort of area was this confrontation, because there is this antagonist, Ringo. So kind of the force to have this confrontation with the forces of antagonism. And that's when her big change is really that she doesn't want to do what she's designed to do. So there could be two. I'm thinking there'd be two reveals.
Right? She doesn't want to kill.
Yeah. She doesn't want to kill, and two, she's an AI. So that she kind of gets those two thrown together. That's what I thought. Okay. But whether that would work or not, I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. And I'm sorry I forgot that, because you did mention that last time, that this is about her. It's an AI who is designed to kill but does not want to kill. Okay, so yes, that should be her big change, right? So the question then is, how do we get her ready for that? So you got to play around a lot more with this. Should I kill? Should I not kill? Should killing be a thing? But maybe take it from the perspective of what is any soldier who's human or not programmed to do? They're programmed to go out and fight and kill and die for their, you know, for their side. Right? And maybe at some point the big change is, you know, if she starts off not wanting to kill, then you probably have to have her kill in the big change.
Yeah, well, I thought that absolutely. And so the kind of in the original outline, she has this in this kind of setup in the, you know, the mentoring section. They go out as the training that she kills something then, but it's not human, it's an animal. But she still feels uncomfortable about that. This doesn't feel right. It's not what.
Yeah.
And then just kind of hinting at the fact that maybe killing is not what she wants to do. And then, you know, but so where I've got to now is like, okay, so they've gone on a live mission, but that was always going to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That she has to carry out an actual mission. And on this, you know, Charlie, her mentor, is injured, or maybe he's killed, a bit like, you know, Obi-Wan.
Yep.
And she has to survive, she has to kill. But she also, you know, so it's kind of like, it's more about survival as an entity, as a being, whatever she is, as a being, as an AI. So but at that point, she also realizes that she's more dangerous and stronger and more of a killer than anyone else, kind of thing, because she's this new weapon.
So I think, you know, like with any character, whatever they don't want to do at the very beginning, you have to have them do at the big change.
Yeah.
And then they have to deal with the consequences of whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
So then that kind of answers it right there. She has to kill, and it can't feel fully justified in that moment, because if it feels fully justified, like, your story's over. She still has to really deeply struggle with what she's done and what that means about who she is and where she can kind of go from there. And then the mastery moment is, you know, I don't know, you could go in a number of different directions here, but what does she ultimately learn about herself? So she didn't want to kill, she has to kill. You know, you could take this in a direction where she realizes, hey, this is my programming, this is what I'm designed to do. If I'm, you know, unless I want to be unhappy my entire life, I've got to do it. That could be a very dark way to take it, but I could see that, you know, version of that working. Or, you know, the more pacifist kind of way to look at it is maybe she finally finds a way to end her programming or overcome her programming, and maybe that even means shutting herself down. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I thought about she goes AWOL, because it kind of like, well, you know, it's more of an open-ended. I don't know whether that would be unsatisfying, but it'd be the idea of freedom, that she escapes from the institution of the military, and she just goes AWOL.
Could be. And think about too how that what types of things that'll be saying. And I'm not saying one, you know, there's a right way or wrong way to do this, but also think about what people will read into that allegory there. You know, are we saying because human soldiers are programmed to kill, are we saying they should go AWOL, or are we saying there's a way to change the system from within, or, you know, what? I don't know what that is, but just be prepared for that being something that people are going to take into account when they take a look at this. You know,
will do.
Okay.
So all that was incredibly helpful, because I mean, the story is kind of developing in my head, and I just haven't got it all down on the page. But it's kind of, you know, I've been thinking about it. So
steps, like, take note of these steps and run through different possibilities with them. I would say with each one of them, if you're still in the stage that you are right now, come up with several different options for each point along the way, and come up and you settle on the option that feels the most creative, the most out of, you know, that doesn't feel cliched, that feels like you're really treading new ground here. This is a difficult work to do, but it ends up paying off in the long run. Okay.
No, I remember you saying that last week as well. Come up with at least 5 different potential paths to go down, and that was incredibly useful, Chris. So thanks, man.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thanks, Martin. Before the next person, give me a second. I will be right back. Okay.
while we're waiting, I've been watching a series on Netflix that's set in Ireland that's kind of bad. Yeah, not terrible, but just bad enough. And I get irritated with it and I stop watching and then I come back again. I keep thinking there's so much to learn from this because they just make so many mistakes and it's kind of, you can pick the errors. It's like a little signboard saying, do not do this. You know, when you are writing, do not do this. And I've gone blank on what the series is called, but
what's it about?
Send us the name of it when you remember what it's called.
Yeah, it's got such a bland title as well, but it's this man is murdered and his widow is hunting for the truth, is searching for the truth. And she keeps this, that she knows there's something very wrong because he had a gun with him when he was murdered. And the number of times that, Chris is back, so I'm just talking about a really bad Irish show that I'm watching at the moment because you learn more from a bad production than you do from a good one.
Sometimes, yeah, definitely. There's so much television, so many series out there that, I think a lot of people are kind of just surrounded by bad storytelling and they use that to structure their own stories, which is really unfortunate. I end up seeing, because I end up reading a lot. So why don't we start with you then? And what's we're talking about Still Laughing, right?
Yeah, which is a bad title. I want to get rid of it, but I haven't come up with anything better.
Well, it's a working title, so just need something to kind of start us off with, right? So, well, let me ask you: are you finding this what we've been talking about today here helpful in any way? Is this
yes,
useful or yeah?
Yes, as I think I mentioned before, my process. It always sounds a bit pretentious, but I start writing, and then I go back and do the outline, and then I write a bit more, and then so I sort of jump backwards and forwards. And something after I sent this revised outline to you, literally 5 minutes later, I clarified the one sort of really huge question that I hadn't resolved, which was why did the band break up? And up until 5 minutes after I sent you the outline, and I was going to send you another one and say, yeah, and I thought, no, just let it sit and fester for a while. So that's been hugely helpful, just in not thinking so much, because I was playing in my mind over and over, did the band break up because of this or because of that? But when I sat down and wrote the outline, the revised outline, that was when the penny dropped about the one and only reason that would have forced them to break up at the time that they did and in the way they did. So I found that.
What is that?
Sorry?
What is that thing that forced them to break up? What is?
Okay, so they started playing together when they were sort of 14, 15. They're now in their late teens, early 20s. They're getting successful. They've got fans. They're touring. They're into the whole sex and drugs and rock and roll. They're drinking too much. They're doing too many drugs. Eddie starts to get sick, but he's just complete denial about it. And Milo notices. Milo actually sees, because Milo knows him so well. Milo sees that there's something wrong, but of course can't say, you're sick, you need to deal with this. So they keep going. And then Milo realizes that the only way he can force Eddie to get help is to break up the band. So Milo says, I don't want to do this anymore. Break up the band. We're all going back. I've got all these wonderful opportunities. I'm getting offers. I'm the lead singer. So I'm getting all these other offers. You guys are holding me back. Eddie, of course, realizes what Milo's doing and resents him for it. So the resentment between Milo and Eddie is that Milo sacrificed for Eddie and Eddie resents him for doing it.
Yeah.
And the four characters, I got rid of one of the characters. Much as I liked him, he was one of my darlings, but I killed him because he didn't really, other than comedy, he didn't really add anything. So the 4 characters, 3 of them are not integrated psychologically. So Eddie is still in denial. He's still doing all the pranks and the kind of, excuse my language, dickhead behavior that adolescent boys do. Milo's not integrated because he's still kind of doing this, I'm an artist and that's all, I'm not going to be sensible and work with anybody. I'm just going to, throw tantrums when I don't get my way. Kevin has taken the sort of the responsibility of being an adult, but has excluded everything else, all the other parts of his personality that should be integrated and not. He's just going with this one aspect of his personality and resents his wife, in a way resents his kid, and all that.
Yeah.
And Ike is the only one that has made choices and accepted the results. He has chosen not to marry, not to have children, to just focus on not to have fame and fortune, because he just works on this sort of classical guitar music that he loves, but he's satisfied with that. So when they all start to confront each other, my idea is at the end, the band doesn't rejoin and have a big concert and my idea is at the end the band gets together, but as individuals. They've sort of integrated those parts of the personality that they've denied up till then and have become, more psychologically sound. Like that's kind of the deep idea of what I'm trying to get at.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, so I guess still a question here, like, do you see Milo as the protagonist or do you see the band as the protagonist?
Hadn't thought of that. Hadn't thought that the band could be the protagonist. So I'd have a big question mark. I'd have to think about that. That's good.
Because here's the thing. The way you've kind of written the outline and the way you've described it to me, it sounds more like it's the band that is the protagonist as opposed to Milo being the protagonist. Because if it was Milo being the protagonist, the whole thing would be about him having to go on this journey of self-discovery and self-realization. But everything that you've described and the way that you've kind of written out this outline seems more like these guys as a group. Even the way you said it, they each are integrated personality-wise into one another by the very end. That's them as a group achieving this mastery of the character arc by the end, right? So in either case, like that's where whoever the protagonist is going to be, we've got to really commit to them and not kind of go outside of whatever their perspective is. I will tell you, it is harder just in general to construct a multi-protagonist story, like a story that has a protagonist that's split between different characters, but it's generally more workable when you have the characters going after the same goal, or they're in the same group, the same family, which is exactly like what a music group does, right? That's why most ensembles that you're going to see that are going to be worth, or multi-threaded stories, that are going to really kind of stand the test of time will be the ones that are kind of about families, or it's about people all sharing in one same event at like a same kind of space and time sort of thing. It's the stories where characters, you have characters spread all over the world. We don't quite know why they're all connected or what they're doing. They just do these little things that add up over time, where it's kind of like, what the hell is going on? That's where multi-protagonist stories can go wrong. But since you have a group of guys who essentially used to be part of a family that has fallen apart and is trying to come back together again, you're essentially telling us a family dramedy, a family drama with some comedy in it. That's essentially what you're doing here, even though they're not related by blood. They're sharing the same goals, the same experiences. They have this, common well of emotional experience and knowledge to draw from, right? So that's where you got to decide whether you want to do that or whether you want to make this Milo's story, because in either case, you have to commit, because right now it's kind of wavering in between the two, and it's not going to play out as a fully satisfying, fulfilling story if it's kind of trying to skirt those edges right there, like you can look at American Beauty is a tough one, right? It's a family. It starts off and ends with Lester Burnham and Lester Burnham talking. He probably has the strongest character arc, but there's an ensemble element to it as well. But the issues that those characters are facing are very closely tied together, like in space and time, right? It's like most of them live all in the same house. The ones who don't live in the same house are over there all the time, or are next door neighbors, right? It doesn't spread out the focus of the camera into all these different directions. So if you want it to be about this multi-protagonist ensemble of the band, then we've got to make sure we understand how they're connected very early on. That's how American Beauty can get away with it, because we know we're meeting a father, a mother, a daughter, a next door neighbor. Like, we have an immediate shorthand as to how those people are related to one another, right? The problem with introducing, and this is where I'm seeing a bit of a problem, is introducing one guy, having him go about his way, then you cut to another guy, he goes about his way, and we keep doing that until we then finally see them come together. People watching that are going to be like, where is this going? What are we doing? What's the point here? Because what's going to happen is you'll be spending so much time. Every character you bring in, you have to show us what their limited awareness is, what their ordinary world is. And that takes time, because we have to relate to them. We have to understand where they're kind of deficient, how their world is holding them back, and what's ordinary for them. And if you have to do that for 3 different people, and they're all very different in what they're dealing with, it's going to take up a lot of time, right, to do it effectively. If you cut it down, try to do it too quickly, people won't relate to it. It won't sink in with them, right? So it's a matter of, logistical time concerns that we're dealing with here, right? So that's one way, or one reason to have like what American Beauty does. We introduce it mainly through Lester Burnham. Yeah. And we don't flip into other characters' perspectives for a long amount of time until we get to the true hook of Lester Burnham's story. Yeah. So that may be something to consider here, where, with Milo, we spend time with Milo in the beginning, get to know his ordinary world, get to know that there's people that he lost in his past, and then introduce those people as he comes back into contact with them. Like, maybe it's about him trying to bring the band together, because then you don't have to flip the channel between a bunch of different character perspectives, and then we have to find our footing with each one of them, because that's going to extend your Act 1 to interminable lengths, or it's going to make if you try to, close it down too much, like I said, it won't sink in. It'll all feel very surface level and superficial, So that's, I think the first thing here is figuring that part of it out. That's a huge thing that will kind of make the biggest difference here. I was thinking, as I was reading through it, maybe do like I was saying, what American Beauty does. Lester Burnham, or Milo, is our Lester Burnham, who introduces the other people. And what we need to do, though, is make sure that we feel Milo is relatable. Because in this outline, I don't yet feel like why I should feel empathy, sympathy, or just feel like I'm relating to him, because he feels a bit like a dickhead, to use your word, in the very beginning, right? Yeah. I understand what you're saying when you were describing it to us when we started talking about it today. You were saying it's revealed that he was actually doing the right thing all along. But you're not going to get people on board with someone who on the surface is completely like a dickhead, and then later on we learn that, oh, he actually has the heart of gold. Like, we have to see from the beginning, why do we care about this person? If he's completely terrible to everyone and there's nothing else that, I'm not saying he has to be, and I'm not saying he is terrible to everyone. I guess I'm just saying I'm not seeing yet why we relate to him. And that's something that I think needs a bit more work there. So there's that. And, you know, we talked about that. I'm just looking at a couple other notes in here. So on this page where, how many pages is this? So 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 4th page of your outline, you say Ursula goes through Milo's books and realizes that Buddy has stolen all of Milo's money and the money is gone. So to me, the way I would experience that scene based on your outline is a bit problematic, because you're having a supporting character, Ursula, discover something and experience something. She's realizing something. She's finding something out on her own that should be deeply affecting to Milo. The way that sort of scene and that sort of realizing should play out, it should be something Milo finds, Milo discovers, and sets Milo off. If that's what throws Milo's world out of balance, he needs to be the one that finds out about it. Like, it'd be like if we watched Star Wars and, you know, Luke Skywalker's neighbor came up to him while he was in Obi-Wan Kenobi's house and said, oh, hey, by the way, your family was just murdered. You know, we need to go with the character and experience that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we can't have someone else experience that and then tell the character, because then we won't feel our identity being enmeshed with the character.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, that's why we want everything that matters in the story to happen to the protagonist, and we experience it with them, because then we feel those emotions as they do, and that's how we deeply identify with people, and that's how, when they grow, we start to feel that we are growing with them.
Yeah.
You know? So focus on that a little bit. I would say, you know, this whole idea that they are a musical, you know, like a musical group, or they were a musical group in the past, just make sure, whatever pathway you take with this, that is very apparent to us much earlier in the story. Because in the outline, it takes up until like maybe middle of the 4th page, I think, before it really becomes clear that, oh, these people used to be in a band together. But that thread should be woven throughout the story much earlier than that, so that we will know what to expect when they come back together. You know, I could see a version of this where Milo feels his world completely thrown out of order, so he feels like he has to get the band back together. We meet the people through him, and we see how, as he gets back in touch with them, they are reluctant to come back in on this journey with him. And so that's our reluctance to change, right? It's the group having that reluctance together, but he ends up maybe someone else outside of them ends up being the mentor with them together. I could see him being the mentor too, Milo being the mentor, saying, hey guys, let's overcome this. Because we need to expect that group is going to bring a lot of baggage. Like, once we get to the committing point, leading up to that, we have to expect that this is going to be troublesome for them to do, right? So that's why we need to know that there was a history there, that there were problems, that this maybe isn't the best idea, but maybe it's the only thing that they have that they can do. Like, there are lots of things that you just want to make sure you build up there. Let me see. So, and you might want to look at, as examples, look at how other family dramas that are really well written are doing it. You know, because yours is essentially a family drama with those comedic elements. That's why I keep citing, like, American Beauty. because it's just an easy reference point to use. Let me see here. So this point here, I think it's on page 5, where you say Milo decides to reform the old band. Okay? That moment feels like it should be more like the inciting incident.
Yeah.
He decides to reform the band. So that's why when I'm reading it and I'm thinking like we're going this many pages into it, the inciting incident should be, you know, like middle of Act 1 maybe. Milo deciding he needs to do this, or maybe it's even before that a little bit to give it a little bit more reluctance before they decide to commit to it by the end of Act 1. But I think the Act 1 climax, it feels like in the rhythms of natural storytelling like this, the Act 1 climax should be the decision to actually go through with the band coming together or reforming. Yeah. You know? And then just 2 more notes that I kind of have here. I guess, you know, you had gotten to this point, Act 2B. So when I'm looking at Act 2B, that's making me think of like second half of Act 2. I couldn't tell by that point what the real like inner and outer goals were for the band, you know, or for the protagonist, whether it's Milo or the band themselves. Like when I'm thinking of outer goal should be like, why are they reforming the band? They're reforming the band to do something. Are they reforming the band so they can win a contest? That usually comes in all these like band formation things. Like they're getting ready to play some show. Someone's going to give them the opportunity to do this. So they have a goal collectively to work towards. Like that could be the outer goal, right? But then what is the inner goal? You kind of identified what the inner goal is, I think, when you were talking about it. Inner goal is these people have to overcome their past trauma and reform their family in some way. Maybe reforming their family doesn't mean actually keeping the band in order, but reforming the family means incorporating the lessons that each of them have to give to one another. You know, that could be that internal journey, this character arc thing. But I think we need to really have a sense of what that is much longer or much earlier than like Act 2B. Because I wasn't feeling that yet. And then, you know, the last thing just goes back to they do need a goal to pursue, right? The goal can't just be reforming the band, because they reform the band probably by the time they commit to crossing the threshold, right? But you still then have a lot more. You're at 3 o'clock, you still have to get all the way around the clock to make that work, right? So what is the goal that reforming the band is going to help them achieve? Is it winning the band, the Battle of the Bands contest so that they make a lot of money and then Milo can get his, his stuff back in order and the rest of them can get their lives back in order because they need the money, or what? Like there has to be something on the outside that they're working towards, or else it's just going to feel like we put these guys into a room and they're just going to have a series of arguments and play music along the way. You know, like there has to be something that they're working towards so that step by step we can track whether they're getting closer to that goal or farther away from that goal.
Yeah, yeah. I understand what you're saying, and it's a lot to think about. And initially I thought that what brought them, well, the character that I got rid of was the one that actually brought them all together. Yeah. Because he's retired and he's writing his autobiography, and he's the one that's going back and visiting these different parts of his previous life. I got rid of that character because that seemed to be the only thing he was doing. There didn't seem to be much point to have him around after that. So then I thought, well, it's that Milo tries to kill himself and the others realize that he can't be left alone. Mm-hmm. So that brings them initially one at a time and then all together, just to watch him. So, but now I'm thinking, I can actually lose that as well. I don't know what they're working towards. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't be America's got
Yeah,
talent.
yeah, I get that, but you see what I mean? Like they need a thing that they have to that they're doing this for.
Yeah,
Just like, hey, let's reform the band and have some fun. Like that won't be enough to sustain like a real like story tension. You know? And we're gonna need to feel that story tension to pull us all the way through to the end and teach us all those lessons that you want to teach us throughout this story. So something has to be there that why are they reforming this band? What is the goal? Why would these guys who have lives, it's not just about, you know, like Lester Burnham, right? Lester Burnham has a midlife crisis, but he has a goal. He wants to fuck his daughter's friend.
Yeah.
As gross as that is, that's what he wants to do. And that's the goal we're watching him we're following him, watching him do all the way through that, right? So these guys, even if they're going through a midlife crisis, they don't quite have their way. There's got to be something that they're pursuing there, some object that they're trying to like definitely acquire that we can understand. It can't be a loose idea of like, I want to recapture my youth, because we can't tell what that actually means.
Yeah.
It won't mean like what's the end of the line with that? Capturing your youth is impossible. So what are they actually, you know, what are they trying to reach? You know, is it some person they're trying to impress? Are they trying to get a record deal finally? Are they, you know, maybe that's the thing. Maybe they have an opportunity to get a record deal, so they're trying to, you know, try out for this perfect opportunity with this record producer. But it has to be something that they are collectively pursuing that is the glue that holds this whole story together along the way.
Yeah. No, I've got to think about that, because I'm not sure what it is yet. So, Martin, you've got your hand up.
So I'll be very brief, because I know, you know, we're massively over time, but it made me think of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Okay.
And obviously Spinal Tap. Mm-hmm. So I would, personally, when I was reading it, I thought there's so much comedy in it, you could really ramp up the comedy. So there's that. But also I thought, just thinking it might be, I know we recoil at flashbacks, but you might we would benefit as an audience from seeing what they were like as a band back in the day. So maybe, you know, they had the potential to get something really then. I don't know what it's like Chris is talking about, but they have the chance to do it now.
Yeah, I actually thought
it could be comedic as well. Anyway, and in Bill and Ted Bogus Journey is to save the babes from our evil usses.
Yeah.
Not just to reform wild stallions, which is pretty funny if you're into that sort of shit, which I was.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it.
I thought, when I first thought about this, I thought of having, you know, the jumping backwards and forwards in time and having them. And then I realized when I looked at the lyrics of the music, I thought, no, I don't need to do that. I just need them to try and sing the songs they used to sing back when they were teenagers and angry at the world.
Yeah.
And show that, you know, it just doesn't work. You know, men in their 50s don't get angry about hippies.
Yeah. Yeah, still I would say give them a goal regardless of whatever backstory you put in there. Just, you know, I think your biggest thing that I would encourage you to focus on, what is it they collectively are trying to get?
Yeah,
there's got to be something on the surface there they're trying to do, because without that through line, the stories, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
You may have a number of interesting dramatic events strung together, but it won't feel like a story that is working towards some sort of conclusory, you know, ending.
Yeah, got it. Cool. Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, a lot to get done before next week. Thanks very much.
Great. Well, thanks, Yvonne. And Jeff? You there, Jeff?
There we go. I just unmuted you. Hi. Yeah. I didn't send anything because I'm in the midst of reworking all of this, and I was frantically taking notes as we're going through stuff, because the stuff that I had, I was able to kind of put into the puzzle. But basically, I've made it that the young woman is the protagonist. Okay. She basically starts off by being overly confident and fucks up some major bust where an ancient artifact is stolen. In order to kind of like get out of town for a little bit, her dad pulls a few strings because he's a big mucky muck on the force, and they're a family of cops and FBI and CIA. And so they arrange for her to go over to London to go that way, and maybe she can like get out of trouble, stay out of trouble. She lands in MI6. She's the American, not wanted. She's there. And then what happens is she is paired up with this old curmudgeon guy that no one can deal with, no one can stand, and which is obviously going to be Merlin. And that's not who she's originally signed up for. But when she's up there reading the board, it magically flips. And so she's like, what the hell is that? And so little things start to happen. Then the way I see it is that she is involved in this major thing that's going on in London that they can't quite, get their hands on. There's like shape shifting and all these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, at the same time, the artifact that was stolen at the very beginning is something that these people are using to bring back Mordred. So mm-hmm. they bring her back, and now because there's for lack of a better word, a disturbance in the force, mm-hmm. Merlin goes, there's something not right here. There's something wrong, and is actually caught doing some magic by the girl, which she confronts him. And he explains to her, that there's more than that you can actually see. And she's very hardcore reality, all this kind of stuff. And so the closest she's ever come to any of this stuff is some of the stuff she's read from the stuff in the past, like the Harry Potter and some of the other stories. And so then as they go on, as they're going through all this, I've taken a little bit from, because I looked at the very first Harry Potter, and I looked at Goldfinger. Mm-hmm. And so what actually ends up happening is they're like one step behind, because now what happens is they discover that Mordred is actually, and her followers have gotten their hands on the Holy Grail. And so mm-hmm. it's like, oh shit, what does that mean? And then as you continue to go through, they're like behind the 8 ball. And one of the last things that they're going to at one point, then Merlin does really discover that the girl is either a long lineage of Arthur or reincarnation. I'm not sure which will work, mm-hmm. But she doesn't know yet. And one of the things that happens is there's a big thing in Europe where they have got this new contraption, and you find out that it's actually the internal parts are made from the melted Excalibur. Mm-hmm. And so we find out that bringing the Excalibur together with the Holy Grail is like a power pack to it, can control the world. Mm-hmm. So, of course, no one can retrieve the Excalibur, but Mordred figures out who she is, mm-hmm. the girl, and goes, she is a descendant or she is a reincarnation. We will get her to do it and trick her into it, which she does, and pulls it free. Once it's free, they've got it, and now they've got to follow up. And so by the end, they actually get, defeat Mordred. Merlin has done all this stuff, and they've gotten the Excalibur back, and they've got the Holy Grail back. And so now they've got this weapon, and at the very end, they're going to have to either do something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, either put it somewhere where it can't be found or launch it into space or something. And so the arc for the girl is the fact that she is not self-sure, not sure she's good enough, all this kind of stuff, because she's screwed up. And by the end, she learns to trust herself and has become much better because she works more than just her head. She has learned to trust her heart and her instincts and all that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. So I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I want to encourage you to, really kind of try to map things out to this structure here, because I was noticing a couple things, at least in the way you were explaining it, where it felt a little soft or meandery on certain things, or wasn't hitting certain moments at the most powerful.
Right.
And one of the first things that I was noticing there is I think you've got a lot that you may be trying to cram into this first act.
Okay.
I think you might want to consider speeding up, starting the story a little bit later in her whole kind of trajectory, instead of showing us her doing a mission, the mission failing, and then her father pulling strings, and then her being sent to London, and then her having to work with MI6 and stuff. I could see a version of this where she's sitting in the MI6 offices and she's nervous about something and we don't know what it is yet. And then she's called in and they're like telling her, you know, we don't want to take you on, but your father has a lot of pull, so we're going to have to do this. We know about the nonsense that you dealt with before, so don't try to repeat yourself. We're going to put you with someone experienced to watch over you, right? Start the ordinary world there, because if you start it way too far back, you've got a lot that you're going to have to cram in here.
Got it.
Make sure, because I think the committing point has to be the point where, like, the increased awareness thing, I think there's a lot of delay that's happening before she is given the hint that she might be more than who she thinks she is.
Okay.
So the increased awareness should somehow maybe be like, you know, Merlin, you know, hinting that she's someone else. She's got a destiny. There's more to do, and she just thinks he's crazy. She doesn't want to have to deal with this guy. She doesn't want to, you know, things like that. That's her reluctance to change. But then the overcoming committing is like realizing that the two of them are the only people that are going to be able to stop this big problem, because she has a history with that artifact that was taken, right? Like that's where just like how Luke realizes he's the only one who can make a difference here because he has Princess Leia's thing. She has to realize, your character has to realize she's the only one who can make a difference. So she's going to commit because she knows the history of this artifact because of this this bumbling history she's had within the past. And then it should be her experimenting with Merlin and him telling her a bit more and stuff like that. The big change is maybe the moment where she's actually told about her destiny.
Okay.
Who she actually is, right? The clock, like who she is, what she needs to inherit, but she's faced with that. She's not ready to deal with it. Still, she should be reluctant to deal with that. But the whole dedication, like third act thing, is like her maybe willing to buy into it long enough to just end this nonsense. But then ultimately the mastery thing is like, you know, her willing to accept who she is, what her lineage is, and what role she's going to have to be playing in the future.
Great.
You know, like that's the way I would see mapping it out. And I would encourage you not to show scenes where the bad guys realize things or Merlin realizes things on his own. Keep this her story.
Got it.
When it's time for the audience to learn about something is when she learns about it.
Got it.
If you separate the audience's experience from hers, like if the audience knows many scenes before she does what her destiny is, and like people talking behind her back, oh, you know, she's the chosen one, she's King Arthur's whatever, the audience isn't going to identify with her.
Got it.
You know, we should feel like when someone comes to her and says, this is your destiny, we should experience what she does, which is, you're fucking crazy.
Right.
You know, like what are you talking about? You guys are nuts.
Right.
You know, but if we were, imagine if the scene was a little bit different and we already knew going into that she's the wrong one and they're right, we're not going to experience that with her.
Absolutely. Right.
And then we won't have that really glorious reveal near the very end when she realizes they were right all along.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why you got to keep us in the dark about a lot of things. Build it up around her and keep hinting that this is the truth, but she and the audience can't accept it until that last kind of big climactic moment.
Got it. Great.
All right. Cool. So yeah, I think, you know, I think you've got some good stuff, some good fun stuff that you can work with here.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Well, I hope that's been helpful for everyone. These diagrams, as I said at the beginning, can be found in The Writer's Journey, written by Christopher Vogler. That's Vogler. Some of you may have it. Oh, I see it right there, that Jeff has. Vogler talks about these in far more depth than I would ever be able to in one of these things. I encourage you to go. If you haven't read that book yet, go read it. If you've read it before, read it again. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm rereading it again. I reread it every year. It'll give you a lot more specifics about these things and a lot more examples. To end this for today, again, I want to encourage you to all go take a look at Glow if you can. Even if you look at the description of that episode and you're like, or the show, and you're like, why the hell would I ever want to watch this? Why is he telling me to watch this?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was hilarious.
What kind of tweet?
Worth taking a look at. If you have already seen it, look at it again, but look at it this time, analyzing it and seeing how are they mapping the character arc and how are they mapping the hero's journey, and how are they doing it in a way where they're setting up a story that can continue to go on while still satisfying us in this individual episode.
Yeah.
Okay? So
Chris, thanks for a great session.
Recommended homework for everyone. Please do that so we can discuss it a bit next week. And we will talk next week about the gap in expectations, which if you want to read ahead, you can go and look at the book Story by Robert McKee. Because we're going to talk about McKee's way of looking at the same things that the things we were talking about today. Okay?
Cool.
Martin?
Chris, many thanks, man. I've just got one quick question, Chris.
Yeah.
Did anyone get the recording last week? Because I didn't get the recording. I just wondered. All right.
No.
Okay. I'll just ask Dorian about it.
Yeah.
No worries.
I think Joey's the person to ask. I think Joey looks after us and Dorian looks after other
Right.
groups.
No worries. I'll get him to send it to us, guys.
Yeah, cool.
Chris, thanks so much for a great session. It was awesome.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Have
you.
a good week,
Have a
everybody.
great week, guys.
Sweet.
Hey, guys.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye.